Welcome to MMA Fancast. My name's Luke Payson, and I am joined by a returning guest, Kenyon Troy Moore. Troy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me again.
I saw you got a chuckle out of your nickname. We talked about it a lot when you were fighting at 247 Fighting Championships on the pay-per-view about how your nickname Troy came from the movie Troy, that you kind of have that blonde, long hair look that Brad Pitt had. So it's fun that that's your nickname. But let's jump into it. You are only days removed from an impressive TKO win, about halfway through round two in Massachusetts. So kind of jump into that. You were fighting a really experienced amateur with over 10 fights. So let's jump right into that fight.
Yeah. So, I was really happy with my performance. I got the second round TKO to ground and pound. So I'm still like buzzing off the high from that a little bit and just recovering. But I'm still focused. I'm ready to get back into the gym and get ready for my next one. Yeah.
Well, that's about as straightforward as you can get. When I had you on the show earlier, we kind of talked about the fact that you're training at TKO MMA, obviously the reigning, soon to be defending light heavyweight champion of the UFC. And I've seen Reza, I believe there's another fighter in your gym who's fought at 247. I believe his last name's Reza or something like that. He's on a roll too. He won on your card as well. What's that amateur fight camp like right now at TKO MMA and fitness?
We do. I mean, we follow the same protocols all the pros do. Recently a lot of people have been fighting out of the gym. So the whole fight team's kind of been in camp mode. So it's been like camp after camp, So we definitely believe in the stay ready so you don't have to get ready mentality. As fights come up, we focused on that individual or those individuals that are competing for the specifics of what we think their match is going to be like. Generally it's like either sparring or technique development in the morning and then conditioning in the evening if we have conditioning, and just being smart and staying healthy.
Well, you definitely are showing that mindset of stay ready so you don't have to get ready, because you fought just over a month from each other. Is that a time frame now that you've done it? Before you hadn't done anything that close. Now that you've done, is that a time frame that you could potentially do again if another fight comes up? Do you feel like your body did okay with fighting, 6 weeks from each other or 7 weeks in between?
Yeah. If anything, it was probably easier because I didn't get up to my normal walk around weight. I stayed a little bit lower. So like dieting wasn't a huge focus in this camp leading up to my most recent fight. As long as Glover says it's cool for me to fight like with the similar frequency, I'll stay active like that.
Well, that also shows what I think every really good disciplined fighter should answer, which is there is a connection to the coach, right? The coaching has to be, when you see, I've been around, particularly in the amateur ranks, fighters that kind of want to go out on their own and think that they are going to match their own, they just kind of get ahead of their coaching. I think it's very mature of you in your fight world to know that everything runs through your coach, particularly a coach at that level, but any coach should get that respect. I want to talk a little bit about, we got to talk a little bit in person. I got to call your fight. A split decision loss means that a judge thought you won. So obviously it wasn't your greatest night, but at the same time, you're continuing to roll. And so let's talk a little bit about the fight first. Evan DeLong, it was a split decision. It wasn't as long as you're used to. You're used to fighting 3-3s. It was 3-2s. What do you kind of take out of that? And what, if anything, I hope positive, came from that you just rolled right into your fight versus Chris? Because obviously development is happening, whether it's a win or a loss on the record.
Yeah, so like takeaways from the fight with Evan, it was split decision. I wasn't really that beat up about the night of. I was pretty upset. But I didn't feel like I made any like critical errors in that fight. I think the errors that I did make were strategical. And that it was just like a good learning experience. I think it was like a good way to build my confidence.
Sure.
As far as what my capabilities in the ring are, especially against a good wrestler. It was like I should have just been more aggressive and less worried about what he was going to do and more concerned about deploying my own offense. So a lot of people are asking me like, oh, you do feel more pressure because of your last loss to get this win. And like for a fragment of a moment, I felt that way. But other than that, like I felt pretty good about my performance in Pennsylvania. It's just, the judges didn't see it my way.
Well, and one thing I think that's always helpful is to feel that this thing, obviously it wasn't the outcome you wanted, but then also immediately get on to the fact that if your game plan, like you said, is making your opponent fight your fight, because that's what two people are going to do in any fight. Floyd Mayweather, I don't really care for him as a fighter or as a person because he's had a lot of legal issues. But the reality is that he fights a certain way and people fall into that. Manny Pacquiao, I would argue, did beat him in that one fight because he outlanded him. But typically, people kind of slow the fight down. He does a lot of defensive stuff. He doesn't really do a lot of offense, and that slows it down, and then he wins on decision. So when you think about that fight versus Evan, you're talking about a D1 wrestler, and certainly wrestling played a part, but you also kept it razor thin the whole way, kept it close the whole way. And so I think that, if you could come out of the fact of be more concerned about what you're going to do to them, I think that's kind of a really healthy mindset. I appreciate your time. I did want to get back to your fight versus Chris, because when you have a TKO/KO, you said ground and pound. Can you set that up for us? What led to you guys being on the ground? Was it a knockdown? Was it a takedown? Kind of what process did you go through? Could you set up the last 30 seconds or minute, whatever led to that finish? Could you kind of walk us through that? Because I think that's kind of cool to see from the fighter's perspective of what kind of led to that.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I landed actually a very similar leg kick on Chris the first round that knocked Evan down when I fought him, and I knocked Chris down with that too. And I was landing some leg kicks to work my way inside throughout the first round and the second round. So then, I just decided to set up a Superman punch by faking the low kick. So I deployed the Superman punch with my right hand. And that ended up like it landed. We ended up clinched against the fence. I got a body lock and then I tripped him off the body lock towards the center of the cage. And then controlled him with knee on belly. And, kept his shoulders pinned to the mat and was just like, I actually threw some knees from side control into his rib cage that really softened him up.
Yeah.
So he wasn't able to create any space and stand up. And then I eventually postured up and, just right hands to the head and the refs jumped in.
That's obviously a great transition. I've even had fighters do that with a heavy bag, throw it to the ground, transition. And that's kind of what you did in a very way. Did you finish from side control with a knee on belly? You didn't go into full mount. You kind of stayed in that kind of that tall posture. Is that what you did? Okay.
Yeah, I felt like, my corners were yelling for me to go to the mount, but like the knees were so effective when I got into that position and I felt secure there. I think he used up a lot of his strength in the first round trying to take me down, and he just didn't have the power to create the space. So I stayed in side control and finished from there.
Well, I think side control, some people at the UFC level are even using half guard to control the hip more, because there are some escapes, there's some bucking that can happen in full mount. And so some people are electing, you can kind of see it, electing to stay in half guard in order to keep the hip pin. So I think, finding your own comfortable, I think is very good. It's also, hats off to you. Two things stood out. Obviously a finish is great, but two things stood out when you were going through that. One is, maybe we didn't give enough credit with your striking that you did land against Evan. Obviously, you had that nice low kick that knocked him down. The fact that your striking is continuing to be successful as you fight people with more experience. Evan, only had one fight before you, all of the experience in wrestling. But Chris, obviously already 10 fights into his amateur career. It kind of shows that your kicks are effective against people with even more experience, which I think can always be good. And then another thing that I really liked that you shared is the body lock into a trip. It's not necessarily a wrestling takedown, but I think we're starting to see more in MMA that non-wrestlers such as yourself can still be very effective in an MMA setting. You're not going to go out and do a freestyle wrestling tournament where everything's different. You bend over like this and everything's. But the reality is, how good is that body lock? I think it's a great method for particularly non-wrestlers, but how good is that for you? And how confident are you now that a body lock into a trip can be a kind of a good future strategy for you, technique?
So I've always liked clinch work, whether it's against the fence or out in the open. And I think the body lock from an offensive position is just a great way to protect yourself while like controlling the fight.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of times I get caught in like low shots on a single leg or a double, and you get stuffed, and that's not a fun place to be. Some things that we've worked in the gym is like shooting the single, and then instead of like trying to finish to the ground, you actually come up into a body lock off the single or the double. Because if you're strong in that position, you can take the wind out of somebody, and you're also not in a position to get stuffed or take damage. If you have a strong body lock and a good head position, you get your your head up under their chin, and they're kind of like defenseless at that point, and you're also in a safe position. So I've always felt comfortable there. It was nice getting to that point in this fight to see that it can be a tool that I use.
Yeah, and I think you pointed out really well. Kind of like a chain wrestling mindset is, if something gets stopped, instead of staying right there, because a Darce is super effective from there and a Hikana is super effective from there. Sprawl control, which I love to teach, where you transition from the sprawl control around to the back to a rear naked choker, hooks in. So there's a lot of bad things that can happen when people stall. Way back, Travis Brown knocked out. I forget who he knocked out, but he knocked out because the guy stalled on a takedown right on his hip, and he used those elbows. Obviously, you can't use those elbows. When you go pro, people stalling out on a takedown up against the fence, they don't know. It still happens in UFC. They do not realize how much in danger they are. I sound like a parrot on the 247 broadcast, because particularly when they're amateurs, I point that out. Hey, they're getting comfortable putting their head in a spot on a hip bone and an elbow. There's no space for your head. And I've even seen it at the pro level where fighters still get comfortable resting there. So, but what I liked about what you're saying is, when you are stalling on a shot before the person kind of settles down and puts pressure on you and holds you there, you cut the corner, swing around, take the back, and come up the side, like you said. And I think that's a really fantastic. Are you using the classic Gable grip?
Yeah.
Are you aware of Dan Gable and his famous? He's now 73 years old, so he's an older, but the man Dan Gable is one of the greatest American wrestlers of all times, Olympic gold medalist as well as national champ. He invented the Gable grip and the gut wrench, kind of like what you were talking about. But one thing that he said that you could kind of put in your mind, which I think is very applicable to fighting, is one of his famous quotes is, "If they shoot, I score. If I shoot, I score." Kind of the concept that in defense, he's going to be good, and in offense, he's going to be good. And that's kind of what you're talking about. You're learning to engage wrestling offensively, but you're also learning to engage it defensively and all those things. So hats out to Coach Dan Gable. He's a famous guy. I like some of his quotes. And he's got some great YouTube videos on sort of his mindset back when he was one of the greatest wrestlers of all times. But so overall, what we talked a little bit about what you want to see next as far as fighting, but what do you want to see yourself kind of continue to put together? Is there a flow state you want to get into? Is there a certain technique you're kind of looking to use? Is there a confidence? Like, what do you kind of want to see out of yourself, since all your finishes are all your wins are by finish, and you're obviously physically, you mentioned your size physically at 170, your kind of pro level size. I think you'd be a pro level size with a little bit more muscle at 185, but I think 170, 185 is really where you start to see a lot of big frames. Even though it looked at times that GSP was a smaller frame guy, he's still a big guy for 170. I think a lot of people kind of forget because he fought some bigger guys. But what do you kind of want to see improve on in your next fight?
No, there's nothing really specific in mind. Like maybe grapple more. Like I went into this fight thinking like maybe I try and grapple some, but I can grapple. It's not like my go-to really. So maybe do like some more ground in my next fight. I'd like to take a fight. It's funny you say that, at 185 as an amateur before I go pro. just to see how I do there. But realistically, like I'd have to be walking around a lot heavier than I do now to be competitive at 185. And
Right.
I don't know if I'm going to go through the process of getting heavier just to cut to 185 and then decide I don't want to be there and have to cut down to like a walk around weight that I can hit 170 at. Still seeing that kind of depends on what goal is too. But yeah, my next fight, maybe grapple more and just, continue getting better and, being a little more creative with my striking and getting more comfortable in the cage, throwing stuff that might be higher risk, I guess.
Sure. Well, and part of those higher risk techniques are knowing when to set them up, when not to do them, when to do them. To bring up the greatest 185er of all time, Spider Silva, a lot of his clowning worked because he had already hurt his opponents. He had already frustrated them. And obviously we saw versus Chris Weidman in the first fight that he employed his clowning too early. Now, I'm not a big fan of clowning, but it worked effectively when he'd already hurt his opponent. It doesn't work when your opponent's still fresh. So I think a lot of the technical things are good. I had a fighter, he threw a spinning, I think it was a spinning kick too early in the round. And the guy took his back and eventually got a submission. I think sometimes you have to kind of be aware of where you are in the round. So, one thing that you mentioned on your weight is I think the best example of a 170 moving up to 85 in the UFC would be Robert Whittaker, right? Mm-hmm. Who now he hasn't quite put all his wins together, but still he was champ. He was a good fighter. So I think there is an element that a 170-pound fighter, particularly if your frame, can maybe be actually healthier and better long-term at 185, which I think is what Robert Whittaker, but clearly there is a long process to kind of consider. Your coach, the UFC champ would have to kind of weigh in on that. It is tough. I think sometimes it's good to figure those things out in amateur, and other times you've seen people kind of, including Robert Whittaker, make that decision at a higher level. When he's already in the UFC at 170, makes the decision to go 185. So I think there are times where a move up is actually as good as a move down. I think a lot of times we think that's a wrestling mindset. Moving down is always giving you the advantage. We've seen that not be successful. We've seen people drop weight. Even Jose Aldo went down to 35, not effective for him. So I really appreciate you coming on the show. Obviously, I guess I want to end on this because I do give a lot of respect to your coach. Why not? He's a legend. He, as a person, is one of those guys that, from what I see on the outside, him on the inside, but outside is he's really one of the good human beings in MMA and UFC. Sometimes we put up with shenanigans. I guess we'll say John Jones, but we put up with shenanigans of people that really they don't have it together in their life, right? And Glover really seems that he's really putting it together as a human, running the gym, all those things. Great guy. What are you doing? What role do you have in preparing him? I believe his defense is in May. And how does that, are you an encourager to him? Is it kind of like exciting to see your coach do it? Or do you have some type of training element? Because I do know he uses that gym for himself as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, everyone is involved in everybody's camps in some way, even if it's just to be there to help with anything really. So yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. I don't really know. So the one thing that he's used me for is takedown defense. We do wall work.
Really?
And that's one thing that I'm good at, and I'm quick. So we'll take turns taking each other down off the fence, and he's used me for that before, but he generally gets bigger guys in the gym. Sometimes I try and kick his butt in conditioning, but I should be able to kick his butt in conditioning. It's not always the case though. But yeah, generally he gets bigger guys to really get him ready for his fights.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that makes sense. At his size, he probably is working with a lot of the guys that are technically heavyweights, because a 205er is really a heavyweight that drops 20 or 30 pounds to make 205. I mean, so they're all kind of heavyweights. We've seen heavyweights, light heavyweights slide up to heavyweight. So, but what you just mentioned about conditioning, I think is even more important. Something I learned in a coach is having conditioning practices all together. Sometimes the little energetic 16-year-old or 15-year-old I mean, granted, they haven't matured yet, realized that their body sucks when it gets older, but sometimes having, people of different sizes, even different genders, sometimes can condition and kind of motivate. So I can see you being obviously younger and lighter, your conditioning should be at a higher level than a guy in his early 40s who's quite a bit heavier. Obviously, he's at the UFC level, so really his conditioning probably should even be higher than yours. But the point is, you can really push each other in conditioning. I think that's a part that people sometimes forget, that you don't have to be physically training with him. Obviously, you do at times. You don't have to be physically training with somebody, punching them or them punching you or wrestling to really be helping them. You see this in swimming. Swimmers get better. They never physically do anything to each other, but they get better by pushing each other down the line. They push. I've been a track coach for years. People get better by pushing in practice to get faster. So hats off to you and everybody at the gym. Thanks for taking your time to come on. I can't wait to have you on. So let's do a pre-fight, your next fight coming up, so we can kind of keep this show going. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Luke. Nice talking to you.
All right. Take care, Troy Moore. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.